Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this July 23rd, 2014 edition of Nightcast. 40 victims recovered from crashed flight MH17 have traveled from Ukraine to the Netherlands to be identified. The Dutch King and Queen were at the airport in Eindhoven to receive the bodies with the relatives of some of the people who were killed. Anita McVeigh has our opening report for tonight.
Hearses today for 40 coffins. A reminder that as politicians talk of sanctions and argue, this is the human face of this tragedy. And now we see the first of those 40 coffins emerging. They will hold identical arrival ceremonies for every coffin flown back. This is a nation deeply affected by this tragedy. 2/3 of the victims, Dutch nationals. There are 40 coffins today, but so many more still to come. Nations united in grief over this huge tragedy.
Friends, we have another video on that same thing. Basically, reporter Richard Galpin reports.
A simple, solemn ceremony. 4 of the coffins have been laid out here for this ceremony, and there is a guard of honor from Ukrainian soldiers, and of course there are members of the international community gathered here, diplomats, the people involved in the investigations, and many others representing the countries affected by this disaster. Those coffins loaded into the Hercules aircraft. There are already other coffins inside the aircraft. In total, 40 bodies are due to be flown back to Holland today in 2 planes. They will arrive there. The key point is that when they are there, the identification process will begin. But already Dutch politicians have warned that that process could take really quite a long time. It could be weeks or even months.
Today your journey home begins. It still will be a long journey. We have a painful identification process to go through that will take time. But the Dutch government wants to assure family members and all those concerned that we want to do the identification as quickly as possible with full respect for human dignity.
And friends, this video that you just saw was from the Ukraine, showing the coffins being loaded on the Hercules plane to be flown over to the Netherlands, to Holland, and we opened with the arrival in Holland with tonight's report. More news out of Ukraine, some rather Alarming news. 2 Ukrainian military fighter jets have been shot down by pro-Russian separatists in the east of the country. That today, according to the Defense Ministry in Kiev. The claims have not been confirmed by the rebels themselves. The BBC's Natalie Antalava said she had not heard anything despite being in the same area. But a separatist commander had yesterday said, "Watch the news tomorrow." If the jets had been shot down, she added, it would mean rebels had broken their promise to allow investigators safe access to the crash site. Here's Natalie with that.
The government spokesperson has just confirmed to us that 2 military planes have been shot down at Saur-Magila in Shakhtarsk region. We actually just drove here from that very region. I have to say we didn't hear anything, but yesterday we spoke to a commander from there who told us that they plan to keep on fighting, and he actually said to me, and this is absolutely no confirmation of what has happened, but he did say to me, watch the news tomorrow. That again, this is absolutely no confirmation of what has happened whatsoever, and we haven't been able to confirm that with the rebels. Again, it's slightly odd that we didn't hear the jets being shut down, because we were right in the area at the time, and we did have a military jet fly somewhere nearby over us right now, just minutes ago. But that's all we can tell you right now, and we're continuing to try to confirm this.
And Natalia, if this is the case, military jets being shot down, this wouldn't be the first time.
It wouldn't be the first time, but it's very significant, because the Ukrainian government has, of course, said that they will cease all military activities in the area, in the 60-mile radius of the area. And if the jets were shut down where the Ukrainian government says they were shut down, that means it's within that area. And the rebels and if it's the rebels who do control that area, we know that for sure because we were there today and we have spoken with them. If it is them, that means that they have broken their promise of making sure that the investigators who are here at the moment trying to get more information of what happened to flight MH17 are actually being caught up in the middle of it all, and it means that the rebels might have broken their promise. But again, we haven't confirmed this with the rebels, although the Ukrainian government does say that 2 of their planes have been shot down.
Friends, and beside those 2 planes that have been shot down, which apparently are government of the Ukraine planes, another passenger plane has crashed today after a failed emergency landing in Taiwan, killing more than 40 people, according to local officials. The domestic TransAsia Airways flight crashed near Megong Airport on the outlying Penghu Island. Earlier today, Taiwan was battered by strong winds and rain from a tropical storm, Typhoon Matmo. Cindy Sui reports from Taipei.
This flight took off after the authorities had already lifted the land warning for Typhoon Matmo more than an hour earlier. So the typhoon had already left Taiwan, and it had already started moving toward China. So the flight didn't take off until more than an hour after the local authorities thought it was safe to fly again. But then a local fire department spokesman told me that at the time of the crash, there was still lightning and rain in the area. So this plane must have encountered some problems in the air for it to try to abort its initial landing and do a go-around to try to land again. But, however, it lost contact with the control tower around 7:06 p.m. and it crashed shortly after that into 2 residences about 2 kilometers from the runway of Magong Airport. We know for a fact that there were 58 people on board, including 54 passengers and 4 crew members. So only 11 survivors have been found, and those are the 11 injured taken to hospital. So the remaining 47 people, now the authorities told me they have found no other survivors. So it's assumed that these 47 people have been killed, although they have not confirmed this.
Thank you for that report. Friends, we'll go now to news on Israel tonight. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has arrived in Israel to try to help. His purpose, as announced, is to try to help negotiate a ceasefire between both sides in the conflict in Gaza. At least 649 Palestinians and 31 Israelis have been killed in the past 15 days of fighting. Israel launched its defense on July 8 with the declared intention of stopping rocket fire from Gaza. And of course, the news leads really call that defense an offensive. Yesterday, U.S. and European airlines suspended flights to Israel's Ben Gurion airport after a rocket landed 1 mile away. That'd be 1.6 kilometers away. Bethany Bell has this video report.
The assault on Gaza continues. Overnight, the Israeli army says it carried out 200 airstrikes. This house in the town of Rafah in southern Gaza was hit. The death toll continues to rise. Over 600 Palestinians have been killed in the past 2 weeks. Hamas militants have fired more rockets into Israel. Yesterday, one hit this house in the town of Yehud, close to Israel's main Ben Gurion airport. As a result, US airlines and a number of European carriers have suspended their flights to Tel Aviv. Officials at the airport say traffic is down by about 50%. A number of flights are still operating in and out of Tel Aviv, but there hasn't been this much disruption at Ben Gurion Airport since the first Gulf War in 1991. This is a major transport hub, and many Israelis are concerned that the decision to suspend flights gives Hamas a symbolic victory. Israel's leaders say Ben Gurion Airport is safe. They're putting pressure on the United States for flights to resume.
May I say I regret that airlines have suspended flights. The real answer to the danger of flying is not to stop the flights, but to stop the rockets which are endangering the flight. If any softness or understanding will be shown to the ones who fire the rockets, it's endangering, in my judgment, the air traffic in the entire world.
One plane that did arrive in Tel Aviv today was carrying the US Secretary of State, John Kerry. He's holding talks with Israeli and Palestinian leaders to try and help negotiate a ceasefire. In Israel, another soldier is laid to rest. So far, over 30 Israelis have been killed in this conflict, and there's little sign that the fighting is about to end. Bethany Bell, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
All right, thank you, Miss Bell. Friends, more news out of Israel related to funerals that were held today for Israeli soldiers killed in conflict with Palestinians. The funerals have been held as airstrikes continue to target Gaza. It comes as the UN's top human rights official condemned Israel's military actions, saying that war crimes may have been committed. Now that's what UN top officials are saying. Navi Pillay also condemned Hamas for indiscriminate attacks on Israel. Again, what does that mean? That as long as you make discriminate attacks on Israel, it's okay, Hamas, huh? Is that what that means? She condemned Hamas for indiscriminate attacks on Israel. But your other attacks, well, we'll just overlook those, you know, because everybody hates Israel. Now, why, friends? Why is there such a leaning toward an animosity toward Israel? There's an answer to that, and We'll discuss that as I get into a few things from God's Word after we take a look at this video. And we're going to hear in this video, I believe it's in this video, that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address what the top UN official has said as she condemns Israel and makes mention of hideously of war crimes. I'm going to let you. I'm not going to take the punch away from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu as he has a word to describe the horrible speech on the part of the top UN official. Quentin Somerville has this report.
A cloud of smoke means another Israeli airstrike in Gaza City. Here, the ambulances never stop, and stretcher follows stretcher. At least 2 people were killed and many injured, including children, when the shell landed near a mosque just after noon.
God protect us. We are dying and no one is checking on us. The world, please protect us. Please stop this aggression.
In Israel, another soldier's funeral. This for Max Steinberg. He was killed in an assault against Hamas. As the losses mount, the crowds of mourners grow here. Israel is united in its support for the war. Tens of thousands came to pay their respects. And Paige Steinberg remembered her brother.
As your little sister, I have always thought the world of you. But never in a million years did I ever think I would be standing here with this many people who understood how incredibly strong you are. Words cannot express how proud I am of the man you became.
And Israel is counting the costs in other ways. At the country's main airport, there was a lot of waiting and plenty of worry. Dozens of flights were cancelled here after a rocket attack by Hamas.
The Hamas rocket landed about a mile away. It didn't actually hit the airport, but the militants have scored a huge victory. Israel says that the world is submitting to terrorism, and it should be Hamas rockets that are grounded, not passenger aircraft.
John Kerry's plane was one that managed to land in Israel. Pushing for a ceasefire, he's trying to unite the Arab world and reach an agreement with Israel. In the occupied West Bank, he met the Palestinian president.
So we will continue to push for this ceasefire. We will continue to work with President Abbas and others in the region in order to achieve it. And I can tell you that we have, in the last 24 hours, made some progress in moving towards that goal.
But it seems progress to a truce isn't moving fast, while the offensive in Gaza continues with terrifying force. Quentin Somerville, BBC News, Tel Aviv.
Friends, doesn't it kind of get to you a little bit when you hear politicians you come over and spout off big words? Oh, we've made progress toward this and that, and then, you know, then days later you see effectually there's been, you know, no real progress toward anything like that. You know, we're talking about a crisis that goes all the way, that goes back not just decades, not just 70 years ago, not just a few hundred years ago. It actually goes back thousands of years ago, back to the time of Abraham and his wife Sarah, their handmaid, the Egyptian handmaid Hagar, with whom, after God promised to give Abraham offspring that would be numberless as the sand of the sea and as of the stars of heaven, years roll by and Sarah and Abraham don't have a child, so Sarah says to Abraham, well, go into my handmaid Hagar, and she'll have her child on my knees, and her child will be counted as my child. And that child was named Ishmael. After the child is born, some years go by, and God addresses Abraham and Sarah and says, Abraham, you will yet have a child by your wife, Sarah, whose name you'll name him Isaac, and he will be the son of promise, not this illegitimate son, Ishmael. And after Isaac is born, or maybe even before Isaac was born, when you read the accounts, the animosity between the Egyptian handmaid Hagar and Abraham's wife Sarah begins to boil, and Sarah eventually says to Abraham, she's got to go, and that kid with him's got to go. And Abraham appealed to God, and God said, told Abraham to yield to what your wife says in this. Fellas, there is a time when a man has to submit to his wife. God even says submit to one another, and yet he does say the man is the head in many things. But when the man goes to God and God says submit to her in this, that's the order. And so Abraham sent Hagar and Ishmael on their way, and as they nearly died from lack of water in their travels, Hagar cries, and God hears her cry and sends an angel or Christ, whoever came and spoke to her and said, look, your son will live, and I will make of him 12 chiefs, 12 dukes. There will be many people come from him, and those 12 dukes, those 12 chiefs will become prominent in a certain area of the Middle East, a land that God would give to the descendants of Ishmael. However, it's not the same land that God promised to Abraham via his son Isaac, the son of promise, not the same land. And those 12 dukes, 12 chiefs, not the same as the numberless offspring to come from the 12 sons of Isaac's son Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, and he had 12 sons, including Joseph, who had 2 sons who took Joseph's name. Now, if you understand today, friends, who these people from ancient days in the Bible, who they are in their modern day descendants, it helps you to understand prophecy. And before I go on with our next story, I still got more news, and I still got to tell you about what that UN official said and what Benjamin Netanyahu said. I think I'm going to have to read it to you from another article. It wasn't in the videos. I thought it might be. But one of our news stories just a moment ago about that other additional plane crash today in Taiwan. You know, that relates to, let me put our chart up on the screen for a moment. That relates to this 4th seal, but between the 3rd seal of Revelation and the 5th seal of Revelation, the 5th seal being the next major event in prophecy, Great Tribulation, before the Great Tribulation begins and from the 3rd seal forward to the 5th seal, between those 2 seals, between the 3rd seal and the 5th seal, Jesus Christ said 3 conditions would basically occur in expansion. They would increase and accelerate. There would be loimos, disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt even. There would be seismic activity, commotions in the air, commotions on the ground, commotions in the air like gale force winds of all kinds of adverse weather, just the thing that caused that new airplane crash today. And there would be tarak, trouble, not the great trouble of the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation, but trouble that leads up to the great trouble. The great trouble, the Great Tribulation being the time primarily of Jacob's trouble. It's called by Jesus Christ in plain language the time of Jacob's trouble. And when you understand who Jacob is today, friends, Jacob had 12 sons his 12 sons were to become as the sand of the sea in number, as countless as the stars of the heaven. If he's going to have an offspring big like that, where are they today? You can know. You can know. And one of them is the United States, and another of them is the UK. And it helps you to understand prophecy if you know who's who and where they are today. And that prophecy that Jesus Christ spoke in Matthew 24 about the Great Tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, it's the time of Satan's wrath, and it will be, first of all, mostly trouble for Jacob. It'll be most predominantly upon the modern-day descendants of Jacob, the United States and the United Kingdom. I read you last night from Ezekiel 6, verse 6, chapter 6 of Ezekiel, and verse 6 of Ezekiel. You should go read that yourselves to see what God is going to cause to happen to the cities of the United States and the cities of the UK if the people of these countries do not repent of their rebellion to their Creator. God says, or Christ said in Christ being of the God family and representative of God, even while he was here on this earth in the flesh, he said in verse 21 of Matthew 24, "For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, nor ever shall be." And if Christ didn't intervene and return, in verse 22 it says, "And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved alive," because of the nuclear capabilities and war and the chemical warfare and all that will ensue during that time of round 3 of World War. Mankind would annihilate himself except Jesus Christ return. All right, but let's go on. I've got news we got to cover and close up the program tonight. Friends, the story I was just telling you about with Israel and with the UN officials making statements that lend themselves to calling Israel's defense and offensive in Gaza as something next to war crimes. Now, I don't have a video on it, but I've got some just last-minute news coming on this. Today, separately, the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva voted in favor of an official investigation into alleged war crimes in Gaza. Now, the Prime Minister of Israel gave a response on this. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu condemned the move by the media office and described it as travesty. And friends, I got for you a definition of travesty. I put it onto a slide from one of the online dictionaries. Travesty is defined as, it's an English word used to describe generally an absurd or grotesque misrepresentation, or a parody, or a pejorative, a grossly inferior imitation of something. You know, and you've heard the term, it's been used in the expression travesty of justice. And for the UN official to even be, especially at this moment in time, you know, to be talking in terms of as if Israel were committing war crimes. You know, listen, you've got a nation that has in its charter Hamas. Hamas is in charge of Gaza, so it's the nation of Gaza, essentially. And in its charter, in the Hamas charter, is a goal of the total destruction, to destroy Israel, to annihilate it. That's their goal and intent. And they use as one of their little subliminal goals, one of their little goals to get the sympathy of the world, and and there's a reason why it works, and that's to some degree to the point where even the UN official is, now we got to officially start an investigation about alleged war crimes. There's a reason why there's a tendency against Israel, and it's because of the God of this world who has been left on the throne of this earth. Even though Jesus Christ has conquered him in the supreme battle for world rulership, Christ won that battle. Well, why isn't Christ here ruling? Because there's a plan. God has a plan that's pictured by his holy days and by even creation, the 6 days of creation before the seventh day on which God rested. Those 6 days each represent 1,000 years that God has allotted for mankind to set up his own governments, make his own rules, his own laws, and then to ultimately prove, related to that verse we just read in Matthew 24, verse 22, where Christ said if he didn't intervene, mankind would blow himself off the face of this earth. Christ having said that all flesh would be destroyed except Christ cut it all short and intervened. Let me read that exact verse again. It's in verse 22 of Matthew 24 in your Bible, where Jesus Christ, who won that battle against Satan the devil for world rulership, said, and except those days after the Great Tribulation, except those days be shortened, no flesh would be saved, as the Moffat translation puts it, alive. No flesh would be saved alive. But for the elect's sake, Christ said, those days shall be shortened by the return of Jesus Christ. And there will be a remnant left over after God allows his people, the descendants of Jacob, who, if they don't repent, will be put in captivity. And there will just be a small remnant, maybe something like about 10%, who will still be alive at the time of Christ's return, and then the rest of the story applies. But which I'll go into at another time, friends, because I got a little bit more news to cover. And but Benjamin Netanyahu called the move by the UN official travesty, and indeed it is travesty. It's an absurd or grotesque misrepresentation, with Israel doing its best to notify civilians and telling them, get out of these military post areas. We need to destroy that weaponry. You're foolish to stay there where that weaponry is, because we're coming in to knock that out to defend and protect our people, and we would not be on this offensive except you are continue to lob these rockets into Israel indiscriminately, having killed some of our civilians, and with a goal in mind of ultimately destroying all of Israel, wiping it off the map. And to call Israel's approach anything even close to war crimes is, as Benjamin Netanyahu well put it, a travesty. It's absurd. It's a grotesque misrepresentation of what Israel is attempting to do. Let me scoot ahead for some notes here, friends. Israel's justice minister, Livni, earlier said her country was acting according to international law. UK Foreign Secretary Philip Hammond said today's UN Human Rights Council resolution will not help achieve a lasting ceasefire. It is fundamentally unbalanced and will complicate the process by introducing unnecessary new mechanisms. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has been meeting both Israeli and Palestinian leaders to his goal and purpose to try to help negotiate a truce. His visit follows the decision by several U.S. and European airlines to suspend civilian flights into Israel's Ben Gurion airport near Tel Aviv. I'm reading to you from a report. We've actually covered that part of this story in an earlier report. Hamas spokesman Sami Abu Zari hailed the flight cancellations as a great victory for his people, for Hamas. Speaking after UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon who is also in the region, Mr. Kerry said, well, you heard that earlier report. He says, oh, we've certainly made some steps forward. But thankfully, he did say there's still work to be done. I mean, thankfully, he said truthfully there's still some work to be done. Okay, friends, let's see. All right, there's the slide with where I colored it up so you could easily see. Travesty, defined as an absurd or grotesque misrepresentation. And that's what any claim of Israel committing war crimes, it's travesty. It's a grotesque misrepresentation to try to associate Israel's efforts in Gaza as war crimes. It's just travesty, as Mr. Netanyahu well put it. At least 649 Palestinians and 31 Israelis have been killed in the past 15 days of fighting in the Gaza Strip. Again, Israel launched its defensive on July 8 with the declared objective of stopping rocket fire from Hamas militants. The United Nations says about 102,000 people have fled the situation, the fighting in Gaza, and are now displaced across Gaza. You know, I'm leaving out some wording in the lead-in because the way some of this is worded sometimes, you know, look, you leave out, you people that write these lead-ins, you leave out the essential element that Hamas started this. They are the aggressors. They continue to load missiles at Israel. And if they'd stopped that, Israel would say, hey, fine, our only intent, our only purpose in our airstrikes is to knock out those weapons you're using against us. If you stop using them, hey, we'll gladly cease our fire. But now those who have stayed in Gaza are adjusting to the sounds and sights of conflict, as Yolan Nell, we have one more report on this. Yolan Nell reports.
For more than 2 weeks, this is what the streets of Gaza have looked like. They're much less crowded than usual. Overhead, you can hear the sound of Israeli drones. Often there's the noise of other fighting in the distance. Normal life is on hold here. The market here is really one of the only places you can find a lot of people. So we've been asking them, what do they want from a ceasefire deal?
To lift the siege, open the borders of Gaza and to let everything in and free the prisoners from Israeli jails. This is,
you know, friends, they had greenhouses they had given to them when Gaza was given to the Palestinians. And the reason why the blockade was because Hamas captured one of Israel's military people. And they you know, there's a purpose behind that blockade. I mean, Hamas had evil intentions against Israel, plain and simple. Now, I got one more. I said that was our last video. I got another one. Let me show you this one. I'm pulling up one right now, friends. I'll be able to pop it up to you in a second, which shows how... Hang on one second. You got to see this. The Red Cross officials announced a temporary ceasefire in two zones, so that they could evacuate wounded civilians. However, Paul Adams met one of the Red Cross units when they were attacked by the local Gaza people.
So this is the edge of Shejaiya, and we're waiting here to see if it's safe to go in. The Red Cross has organised what they call a coordination. Now, that's not a ceasefire or a truce, but it is an opportunity, after discussions with both sides, for them to go in and perhaps retrieve bodies from the rubble. But we can hear occasional sounds of gunfire coming from this neighbourhood, and every now and again an ambulance comes racing out, heading for Shifa Hospital. So for the time being, we're just going to wait here and see what happens.
encountered serious fighting going on, and we got a clear signal that it was time to leave. So there's a lot of fighting back down that way. It's not safe.
So too dangerous to carry?
Absolutely too dangerous to carry on. You can see... Whoa! Okay.
Now, I don't know exactly what happened there, but just as the Red Cross was coming out of Shejaiya, they were attacked by local civilians. I don't know why, but I guess what that tells you is that after days and days of this, people are extraordinarily angry and they're not thinking straight.
Incompetent. What else can we say about it? We are asking them to protect us. I can't understand how the Red Cross behave. They should protect us. There are dead and alive people here. Come and take them out.
Well, that's as close as we're going to get to going into Shejaiya, I think. This place has become synonymous with the violence of the past couple of weeks. And I guess what we've just seen here now tells us that it's not just about appalling physical violence, it's also about a completely traumatized people.
And friends, we saw one of those traumatized people say last night that they, the Palestinians, the people of Gaza, are going to be extremely angry with Hamas if they don't get their borders open and things like that. The goals, some of the goals they want, and they recognize that Hamas is largely responsible for that. And that's one reason last night, friends, I was making some comments about U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry. Just stay out of this thing in Israel for a while. Cool your heels. Let Israel make some headway against this evil terrorist organization, Hamas. Let the people in Gaza get angry like the man last night said they would if some of the things they would like, which frankly Hamas is causing these ill effects to happen to the people in Gaza, which Israel did not put on them before Hamas did their terrorist things against Israel. So there's a cause and a purpose, and it all comes right back on the head of Hamas, which you can see physically, but ultimately, for instance, we report news related to the Bible and prophecy. It ultimately comes back onto the head of Satan the devil, who I mentioned earlier, Jesus Christ conquered in the supreme battle for the ultimate rule of the earth. And when Christ returns, the governments are going to be angry with Christ because they don't like the idea of one world rule by a member of the God family. You know, Jesus Christ, who was there with the Father as the Word when He created the heavens and the earth. When they created this earth most beautiful. When Satan was already in existence, because the angels, it's reported in Job, shouted for joy at the creation of the earth. It was so beautifully made. It was not made when God and Christ originally made it. Christ then was called the Word, as John 1:1, the first chapter of John, describes him. If you're scratching your head and saying, huh, Christ was here when the earth was created? Yes, but not by the name Jesus Christ. He was here under the name of the Word. But read the first chapter of John. You'll see that. I don't have time to go into that tonight. You know, we go into it on the weekends, that kind of thing, much more in more detail. But read the first chapter of John. You'll see it. Friends, I got to close it up tonight. One more story, one or two more stories I want to give you. I want to definitely give you this next story. You need to know what's happening in Syria. While all the other things have been happening, the things related to the Ukraine crash and then the things going on between Israel and Gaza, that's kind of covered things up for Syria such that this week in Syria, it's been described as one of the most deadly weeks since fighting began there 3 years ago. More than 1,700 people, more than 1,700 people have been killed in 7 days as fighting intensified after President Assad was sworn in for a third 7-year term. We showed you that news last week. Fighters for the Islamic State in the Iraq and the Levant, ISIS, have been accused of killing many government troops in a battle at a gas field. The BBC's Rami Ruhayem looks back at one of the bloodiest weeks in the Syrian uprising.
The following report contains some disturbing images.
One week ago, President Assad was sworn in for a third term in office. Since that day, with the world's attention fixed on Gaza and Ukraine, fighting in Syria has escalated dramatically. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, more than 1,700 people have died during the past week. The biggest blow to the government appears to have been the capture of this gas field in central Syria by fighters from ISIS. These pictures, too graphic to show uncensored, show only a few of around 250 soldiers and government employees killed by ISIS in this battle alone. And in the countryside of Hama in central Syria, the regime appears to have suffered casualties. These opposition fighters say they've taken over part of the town of Murik, killing many soldiers. There have also been more than 230 civilian deaths, many of them, according to the Syrian Observatory, in shelling by the regime on opposition-held areas of Aleppo. As the death toll mounts, there are signs of a shift in the pattern of fighting. In the past, fighters from the Islamic State and the Syrian army have largely avoided each other, seeking to eliminate other enemies first. As the declared Islamic State expands in Iraq and Syria, its front lines are changing, and perhaps its priorities as well. Rami Ruhayem, BBC News.
And friends, I'm going to give you just one more story as we close up. It's a lighter one in many ways, and yet it does relate to a situation where 32 people were killed. In today's news, the wrecked Italian cruise ship, the Costa Concordia, is being towed on its final journey to the port of Genoa for scrapping. The Concordia struck a reef off the Italian island of Giglio in January 2012 and capsized, killing 32 people. The cruise ship is being towed at 2 knots, almost at walking pace, with an escort of more than a dozen tugboats. The journey, which is expected to take 4 days, began shortly before 9 o'clock local time, 7 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time this morning. This time-lapse footage shows the first 15 minutes of the operation. Alan Johnston reports.
This last phase of this really major salvage operation, the biggest the world has ever seen, is well underway. The Costa Concordia, as you see now, well out to sea. It won't be long before it slips over the horizon and leaves behind it the island where it came to grief. All this got underway in what you can see are perfect summer Mediterranean conditions. Ocean-going tugs straining at the great weight of the ship, and very, very gradually she began to move. She will arc out towards the French island of Corsica. The French authorities have been given all assurances that there'll be no pollution threat. Then, over a period of about 4 or 5 days, she'll head for the port city of Genoa, where she will eventually be scrapped over a period of about 2 years. And so, at last, the beautiful remote island of Giglio has ridded itself of the rusting hulk that disfigured its shoreline and was a constant reminder of that terrible night 2.5 years ago.
Okay, friends, and I got it. That island is called Giglio. Friends, we went a little longer tonight. We've been doing that for the past several nights. Some of you have been encouraging me to turn this into a 1-hour news evening report because of the situation and news out of the Middle East with the Gaza-Israeli war and with the Ukraine-Malaysia MH17 downed airplane, we've had to go a little longer to cover the essential stories of the day's news. But that's it for this Wednesday night edition of Nightcast, friends. God willing, and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Thursday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.